Assalamu alaikum. I am back with another episode, and this one is about Eid. Eid is almost here, and so are the Eid moon debates. A headline in Birmingham Live a couple of days ago said, "Warning over divided Eid as conflicting eidulfitr dates expected in UK." Now, this is despite the fact that we all started Ramadan at the same time, and all the data is available to tell us when the moon will be visible in the UK. How do we end up here every year? And how do we end up every year being a divided community? Let's analyze that today. First things first, we need to first check if there is any religious guidance available at all about the start of Ramadan and the end of Ramadan. Yes, there is. We have quite a few hadith reports that pick up this topic. And those hadith reports pretty much say the same thing. There is no conflicting or contradictory information in those hadith reports. So I've just selected a couple of reports from Sahih Muslim, Kitab Siyam, or the Book of Fasting. The first one is report 1087. Qurayb reported that Fadl, daughter of Haris, sent him, that is Fadl, her son, to Muawiyah in Syria. I, Fadl, arrived in Syria and did the needful for her. It was there in Syria that the month of Ramadan commenced. I saw the new moon of Ramadan on Friday. I then came back to Medina at the end of the month. Abdullah bin Abbas, may Allah be pleased with him, asked me about the new moon of Ramadan. And I said, "When did you see it?" I said, "We saw it on the night of Friday." He said, "Did you see it yourself?" I said, "Yes, and the people also saw it, and they fasted, and Muawiyah also fasted." Whereupon he said, "But we saw it on Saturday night. So we will continue to fast till we complete 30 fasts, or we see the new moon of Shawwal." I said, "Is the sighting of the moon by Muawiyah not valid for you?" He said, "No. This is how the Messenger of Allah ﷺ has commanded us." In the same book, Kitab Siyam, I am now reading out report 1081. Abu Huraira reported Allah's Messenger as saying, "Observe fast on sighting it," that is the new moon, "and break the fast on sighting it," the new moon. "But if the sky is cloudy for you, then complete the number." So what the Prophet is saying is, if you can't determine if the month has ended, because the lunar month can be 29 or 30 days, then complete the count of 30. Now, as I've said before, we tend to take a literal approach to Hadith text. We think that it is a religious obligation to physically see the moon with our eyes, or these days with a telescope. Now, we call this Royat-e-Halal, or physically seeing the moon. This is a very strange interpretation of these reports, and I want to problematize today and say that this interpretation is actually incorrect. We have to remember that in the olden days, there were no clocks or calendars. Both the sun and the moon were time and date markers for that community. So, for example, we have reports from the companions of the Prophet about the time of Fajr prayer, and they will say things like, Fajr is when light fills up your courtyards and your pathways. Okay, so they would give an example of something physical happening. Similarly, we have reports where we find that the length of the shadow helped in determining the time of the Asr prayer. So when the shadow lengthens, that's the time when you say your Asr prayer. So the sun was used to mark time, and the moon was also used to mark time and date. This was the method available to people 1400 years ago. And of course, the world has changed a lot since then. What is interesting, though, is the contradiction we see in our community behavior, that whilst we're happy to accept scientific data around the sun, we don't want to accept scientific data which is to do with the moon. So, for example, we accept the scientific approach. We use, for the sun, we use calendars, we use clocks, we wear wristwatches, or we have clocks on our mobile phones. We have apps on our mobile phones that tell us, according to the clock, when it's Fajr time, when it's Zohar time, when it's Asr time. So we are all using the scientific approach. None of us ever step outside into the garden and try to see the length of the shadow and then decide if we're going to say Zohar or Asr or not. But when it comes to the moon, we suddenly step back into 7th century Arabia. And then bizarre things happen. right? People ride horses into the desert to physically sight the moon and then come back with a testimony. And in Pakistan, a committee of Maulanas gets onto the rooftops with this massive telescope, and they all congregate to try to see the moon together, whilst they also have a bit of a party as well. You know, they have some biryani and some dessert being readied for them so they can announce the good news. Why are we here? Why are we using these approaches? And what is it in those hadith traditions that we've missed? I believe that we've missed two important principles which are being established by those hadith traditions. One, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was establishing a method that was rational and scientific for his time. So he was using physical observation. We would now call it the scientific method. Okay, so he was using physical observation to make a decision, because the lunar month can be 29 and 30 days. Now, this bit of the hadith often gets overlooked. Okay, so we look at the first bit of the hadith, which says go and see the moon. But we don't look at the second part of the hadith where the Prophet is saying that see the moon and then determine the start or end of the month. Why? Because the month can be 29 or 30 days. So he's actually giving the scientific reason, the rational reason why we need to go out and establish the start or end of the month by seeing the moon. Okay, so this is him trying to explain to us what we would today call the scientific method. Okay, it's a rational scientific method. Go out and check, because that's the only way of determining that. Why? Because the month can be 29 and 30 days. That is key to remember. And this is the bit of the hadith that is often overlooked. It is also clear from the hadith reports that both Ramadan and Eid have an emphasis on the local and the communal. And the hadith that I read out to you earlier makes that point. Okay, so Eid in Syria, the start of Ramadan in Syria was a day before the start of Ramadan in Medina. And that's absolutely fine, because Syrians would be doing Eid with other Syrians, and people in Medina would be doing Eid with their local community. And this is the second important principle. Eid and Ramadan should be bringing the community together, and Eid and Ramadan should be done locally. If we divide the community, then we end up going against the guidance of the Prophet. And this is an important thing to note. Okay, so all of the mosques which take a very political role in our lives, and I would say a very divisive role. I mean, they're divisive across other issues as well, like not creating appropriate spaces for women or just shunning women from mosque spaces. They're also divisive when it comes to making announcements about the Eid moon, and all kinds of politics comes into it, you know, ethnicity of the congregation and the maslak of the congregation. And it's just a really unfortunate state of affairs. Whereas if we look at the hadith report, it is establishing the principle of local and communal. And that principle gets overlooked when we go into these really divisive moon sighting discussions. What is also really astonishing here and quite disappointing is that we have predictive data on the visibility of the moon. Predictive data for years and decades ahead is available. Astronomers have pulled that together, just as we have predictive data about the sun. You know, astronomers predict for us when sunrise will happen, when sunset will happen. You can see it on your weather forecast. Similarly, astronomers predict when a new moon would be born and when it will become visible. That data is available. But as a community, we refuse to use that. Now, as a result of this confusion about moon sighting and the behavior of mosques, whose decisions, as I said, often divide communities, we end up in what I now call the Eid pudding crisis. Okay, now it's the Eid pudding crisis. I call it that because when I had moved to the UK, I had a few occasions where I made my very famous Eid pudding. Everybody loves it. It's a family recipe. And I made the mistake of taking it to my friend's house only to find that she was still fasting. So we had finished fasting. We were celebrating Eid, and half of the Muslim community was not celebrating Eid. So you end up in this bizarre situation, right? And this Eid pudding crisis is very real. People feel quite upset about it. There is a lot of conflict at personal level as well. So if I am doing Eid, if I'm celebrating Eid on a day other people are not, then I'm thinking, am I missing a fast? Okay, and then the other people might be thinking, am I fasting on the day I should be celebrating Eid? Because the Prophet has actually said not to do that. So not only do we feel that at personal level, that personal conflict is happening at the level of our personal faith, we also have families falling out with each other. I mean, I don't even know when my sister-in-law will be celebrating Eid, and she only lives an hour away. So it creates really, really difficult family and community dynamics, okay? And it is actually a decision that we can get right quite easily. We had a few years ago in the UK, we had a development where a local initiative was set up by community members. It was called the New Crescent Society. And we thought that because they were taking the lead on this, that this would solve the problem in the UK of having two Eids. But they also ended up training people to hike up to moors and hills and try to see the moon. And the UK is a very cloudy country. I mean, we get like 10 days of summer, about 10 days of blue skies. And it's often not possible to see the moon at all, or even the stars. And we ended up in the same frustrating loop, because now you have members of the community trying to climb up moors and try to see the moon physically, because we confused about this, that we think that the religious ruling is to physically see the moon. That is not the religious ruling. The religious ruling is that we try to establish if the month is 29 or 30 days, and we use the appropriate method for that. And we have had strange situations here where I remember a couple of years ago, I think maybe in 2020, we actually had 3 Eids in the UK. Okay, that is how badly the community got divided. Now, even worse, I think, is the situation with some mosques which actually start looking for foreign moons. So if we can't see the moon in the UK, we start trying to find out when the moon will show up in Morocco or in Saudi Arabia. And sometimes even some mosques would say the moon will be born or become visible in America and Canada. Let me just read out a respected scholar's opinion from a local mosque. We wrote to them a couple of years ago and we said, please, can you explain your method? And this is what they came back with. They said, Assalamu alaikum. Firstly, we do not follow Saudi Arabia to decide about Eid. According to astronomical calculations, the moon was born on Monday just after 10 a.m. our local time, and it can be seen in Latin America for a few minutes same day after Maghrib, their local time. And because we do share part of the night with them, we can have Eid same day as them in Latin America. Jazakallah khairan for your sincere query. To this I will respond that I do not share my Eid pudding with Muslims in South America or in Latin America or in Canada. I'm here in the UK. I want to share my Eid pudding with my friend who lives 10 minutes away, or with my family who live an hour away. I want to share it with my neighbors. I want to share it with my loved ones. So with this fatwa, where do I take my Eid pudding? Now, can we do something to change this awful situation? I mean, we do often feel quite disempowered as a community. But I think in this case we can, and we can actually bring about quite quick change. We have a lot of power and agency here. I mean, I have to say, I spent a few years thinking, can we ever change this? And we kept writing to mosques and we kept getting responses like the ones we read out, and it became a very frustrating exercise. We also went through a phase where we thought, you know what, we would only go and attend Eid prayer at a mosque which follows the astronomical calculations, and we did that for a few years. But then we still ended up in a situation where some members of our family were not following that, so we still couldn't celebrate Eid with them, which makes for a very lonely Eid. Anyway, there is good news. We can solve this one. First and foremost, change starts with us. Okay, so we need to inform ourselves, and I'm going to ask you to do the same. Inform yourself about the guidance that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has given us. Really understand the gist, the principles behind that guidance. Okay, and it is those principles which are important. We should not be falling into literalism around physically see the moon with your eyes. The guidance is about being able to establish when the moon becomes visible. And in this day and age, we do that through scientific data. Just as we look at scientific data to determine prayer times and sunrise and sunset, if we can accept the science for the sun, we should be accepting the science for the moon. That's the first step, that we change our thinking. The second step then is that we demand change from mosque committees that are making these decisions, and we demand from them that they make decisions on the basis of scientific data, and that this decision should be made by people who hold scientific knowledge. It is not a decision that should be made by religious scholars, because it is outside their remit and expertise. Now, interestingly, this year, the British government has put data, predictive data about the visibility of the moon in the UK. They've put it on their website, gov.uk. I've put a link in the description of this episode so you can see how they're presenting the data. And the thing to remember here, and because this data is publicly available, the thing to remember here is that mosques are deficit funded institutions. They do not generate their own revenues. Mosques run on the basis of the very generous charitable donations you make to them. And this is why you have power over this. You can influence this. You can choose to write to the mosque committees and urge them to change their approach. And you can also say that you will choose not to donate to them until they change their approach. And why would you want to do that? Because you do not want the community, your family, to be divided. You all want to have Eid on the same day. That is what will bring the community together. If we don't take these actions and don't create this pressure, and don't change our approach, we will always remain divided and confused as a community. And we only have a couple of really important events in our religious calendar, okay? And eidulfitr is one of them. It is a great celebration at the end of fasting for a month, where we are so focused on our relationship with Allah, where we're trying to nurture our relationship with Him. And the Prophet has urged us to celebrate that as a community. He's even urged that people should gather together at mosques for large congregational prayers. And he's even urged menstruating women to join the congregation. They can't pray, but they join the congregation. So the importance of communal congregation here and communal celebration cannot be overlooked or ignored. So I hope that you get to share the Eid pudding with your family and friends who are not fasting. I hope that you manage to have a lovely Eid celebration this year. And inshallah, I will be resuming my work on the YouTube channel soon. I've had a bit of a hiatus, but I leave you with this, and I also wish you a very, very happy Eid. Assalamu alaikum.